Will the United States invade Iran? That question has been on everyone's mind since the US and Israel launched their attack on Iran in late February 2026. Although they were able to eliminate much of Iran's leadership and degrade large parts of the country's military capabilities, they have so far failed to bring about the collapse of the Iranian government or even force it to accept their demands. Instead, Iran has managed to establish a stranglehold over the Persian Gulf, through which roughly 20% of globally traded liquid oil and gas passes. Even though much of Iran's navy has reportedly been destroyed, it has still been able to exert control over the narrow Strait of Hormuz through the threat of ballistic missiles, drones and sea mines. As of the release of this video, Iran is allowing only a small number of foreign cargo ships to pass through the strait, and only after the payment of an enormous toll, reportedly around $2 million. Iranian oil, meanwhile, continues to flow out of the Gulf and into global markets. This has created a major problem for the US. Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is putting enormous pressure on global energy markets, which then spills over in nearly every other part of the global economy, and that gives Iran significant leverage in this war. That makes the next US priority clear: reopening the Strait of Hormuz. There are, broadly speaking, two ways this could happen. The first is diplomacy, but at least in the short term, that option looks unlikely. In late March 2026, the Trump administration announced that it was having indirect communications with Iran about a possible deal to end the war, while also exploring the possibility of formal negotiations in either Turkey or Pakistan. The problem, however, is that neither side appears willing to compromise. The United States has issued a list of maximalist demands, including the full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the end of Iran's nuclear program, an end to Iranian support for proxy groups across the Middle East, and eventual limitations on Iran's missile capabilities. Iran, in turn, has responded with maximalist demands of its own: the dismantling of US military bases in the Gulf, reparations, and long-term security guarantees. So for now, diplomacy is likely to fail. That leaves the second option: military escalation through the use of ground troops to seize territory. Now, if the United States wanted to take full control over the Strait of Hormuz, it would likely need a force hundreds of thousands strong and would have to occupy significant parts of southern Iran. And at the present moment, that is simply not realistic, as there is little support for the war back home. But in recent weeks, the US has still ordered thousands of additional airborne soldiers and marines into the Persian Gulf, and that strongly indicates that the US appears to be considering a much more limited ground operation that would nonetheless have a major effect on the situation in the Strait of Hormuz and on the war as a whole. In that regard, there are really only two plausible options. The first is Kharg Island, which has received the most media attention in recent weeks. At first glance, that may seem strange. After all, Kharg Island is not near the Strait of Hormuz itself, so how would occupying Kharg Island help reopen the Strait of Hormuz? It's because Kharg Island is absolutely vital to the Iranian economy. The waters near much of Iran's coast are shallow, making it difficult for large oil tankers to load there directly. To solve that problem, Iran built infrastructure connecting its mainland oil system to Kharg Island, where the waters are deeper and supertankers can operate more easily. As a result, the island became Iran's main oil export hub. For decades, a very large share of Iranian oil exports, periodically up to 90%, has moved through Kharg Island. If the United States were able to seize the island, it would place Iran's main source of revenue under direct threat. In theory, that could pressure Iran into accepting US demands, or at least into reopening the strait. But that is far from guaranteed, and there are three major problems with this option. Firstly, Kharg Island is fairly isolated and close to the Iranian mainland. Any US force occupying it would be under constant threat of Iranian missiles, drones, artillery, and special forces raids. And even if the island were occupied, that would not directly improve the security situation of shipping inside the Strait of Hormuz itself. Secondly, an occupation of Kharg Island would likely disrupt the export of Iranian oil into global markets. And some of you might be wondering, wouldn't that actually help the United States by weakening Iran's economy? Well, not really. The United States has a strong interest in preventing a total collapse of energy exports from the Gulf, because that would send oil prices through the roof and deepen the global economic shock. This is why the US has temporarily lifted some sanctions on Iranian oil exports. And there is another risk here. If Kharg Island becomes a battlefield, its energy infrastructure could be badly damaged, which would limit Iran's oil export capabilities for years to come. And although Kharg Island was attacked by the US already, it only attacked military installations to avoid exactly that. And thirdly, Kharg Island is unquestionably sovereign Iranian territory. Now, it is fair to say that violating Iranian sovereignty and international law is probably not the main concern of the US in a war scenario like this, but the presence of American ground troops on undisputed Iranian soil would still have major domestic political consequences regarding the 2026 midterms, but also in the 2028 presidential elections. That is because it would make it much easier for Democrats to argue that Trump and the Republicans have dragged the United States into yet another costly and unpopular ground intervention in the Middle East. That brings us to the second option, but might be the solution to all of these problems: the disputed islands of Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb. These three islands sit right at the Strait of Hormuz, and what sets them apart from all other islands in the region is that they are controlled by Iran, but also claimed by the United Arab Emirates. I'm not going to go into the full history of the dispute here, but to keep it short, what is today the United Arab Emirates was once known as the Trucial States, a confederation of Arab sheikdoms which were protectorates of the British Empire. During this period, Britain sought to control the Persian Gulf, and the three islands of Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb became disputed between Britain and Iran. Eventually, Britain occupied the islands and they were administered by the Trucial States until 1971, when Britain left the region in wake of global decolonization. That same year, Iran took control of the islands at the behest of the still ruling Iranian Shah, who saw this as an opportunity to retake those territories. The United Arab Emirates, which was formed shortly afterwards from the Trucial States, protested this and has maintained its claim over the islands ever since. This unique situation represents an opportunity for the US to, well, invade Iran without technically invading it, because the legal and political optics are much more ambiguous compared to Kharg Island. They can instead argue that it is not actually invading Iran proper, but rather assisting in the liberation of territories that the US regards as belonging to the United Arab Emirates and being under Iranian occupation since 1971. Now, it is worth remembering that these islands were not originally occupied by the Islamic Republic of Iran. They were instead seized by the government of the Shah, who at the time was a close US ally, so any attempt to blame the current Iranian regime alone for the original occupation would not hold up. Whether this legalistic argument would convince much of the world is another question, but from a propaganda and domestic politics perspective, it is clearly more useful than openly landing US troops on undisputed Iranian territory like Kharg Island. That ambiguity would not eliminate the domestic political cost, but it would at least reduce it. In addition to that, targeting Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb has also other advantages. For one, the islands are geographically far more relevant. Unlike Kharg Island, they sit right next to the Strait of Hormuz and near the main shipping lanes. That means they could actually be used to influence traffic through the strait and to support air defenses, radars, missile defenses, and anti-drone operations in the area. For another, occupying these islands would not directly interfere with Iran's ability to export oil from the Gulf in the same way a seizure of Kharg Island likely would. And if the US manages to hold these islands for long enough, it can utilize them as bargaining chips in future negotiations with Iran, and if that fails, it can simply hand them over to the United Arab Emirates. That said, this option also has its limits. While seizing the islands could improve the US position, it won't stop Iran from utilizing its missile and drone arsenal, and it's possible that such an operation will cause significant casualties for the US over time. So it's conceivable that the US may decide to abandon the islands shortly after occupying them before Trump just unilaterally declares victory. Whatever happens, one thing is clear: a US occupation of Iranian islands will represent a significant escalation in this conflict. A big thank you to all my patrons and channel members. Until next time.